Oh my gosh, we have the Hallelujah Choir in here. Wow.
Awesome.
Thank you, Sylvia and Jack. Wow. So great to be with all of you here today on this Easter Sunday. And was anybody up at sunrise this morning? Anybody? Oh, a few people. Okay. Where I live up in the mountains, the sun was so bright this morning. It was just this radiant beam coming through the windows, and I just pictured people singing, clutching their coffee, singing. And it was just so beautiful that even the shadows of the houses and dogs walking by looked happy. So today we celebrate not only with our Christian brothers and sisters around the world, but with all people who celebrate the renewal of life. Because that's what this message is about, renewal of life today. And Easter says to us, transformation is possible. And not only possible, but natural, inevitable. As surely as spring follows winter, as surely as the sunrise follows the sunset. So we are in this energy of renewal and transformation. So Easter is more than the resurrection of Jesus the Christ. It's really about who we are as spiritual beings and going through this human experience. Isn't it fun? You know, with this little ride, sometimes like this, right? Sometimes like this, sometimes like this, but we always rise up again. Always rise up again. It's the nature of life, and divine life is to rise up. So, this resurrection of our faith and our spiritual identity. As the kids in the Sunday school once wrote, roses are red, violets are blue. Jesus is Christ, and so are you. I know some of you are going to be saying that driving home today. So release, renew, rise up. That's our theme for today. And you'll be hearing that phrase a lot, and I invite you, every time you hear it, to take a bite of a chocolate egg or something. But I want to share with you a story about Easter Sunday and the flower lady. And so one Easter morning, there was a woman sitting on the corner selling flowers in a city street. And she was dressed in this tattered clothing, and she was this elderly woman. And a man walking by was going to walk by her, but he noticed her smile, that her weathered face was alive with some kind of obvious joy. So he stopped, he bought some flowers, and he said, "My, you look happy today." And she said, "Why not? Everything is good." And he tried not to stare at the holes in her shoes, and he found that hard to believe. He said, "Don't you have any troubles?" She said, "I can't reach my age without troubles." Only it's like Jesus and Good Friday. When Jesus was crucified on Good Friday, it was the worst day of the world, for the whole world. And when I get troubles, I remember that. And then I think of what happened only 3 days later, Easter, and our Lord rising. So when things go wrong, I've learned to go by the 3-day rule. I wait 3 days, and somehow everything gets much better. Have you noticed that too? Oh, put it into prayer for 3 days. Yeah, that pattern of transformation. So release, renew, rise up. So we know that over 2,000 years ago, one man took a journey of transformation that changed the world. And Jesus in unity, we see him as our elder brother, our master teacher, our way shower, who showed us the way to live with peace, compassion, love, forgiveness. And that power of love that he demonstrated is within each of us, regardless of our background, where we come from, religious belief, tradition, race, gender, or any outward feature of or societal label. We each have that power of love to transform our lives and live at a higher level of consciousness that was made known by his example. So the Gospels tell the story of Jesus last week, leading up to the resurrection, from his entry into Jerusalem, which we talked about last week, to the end of the week with his arrest, his trial, crucifixion, and burial. And the Gospel of John describes how 3 days after Jesus' burial, some of his female followers came to the tomb as soon as Sabbath was over to anoint the body. And instead of finding Jesus, they are met by an angel who tells them that Jesus has risen. So this is the resurrection that's celebrated every year. And in some traditions, the celebration of Easter is focused on Jesus as the only Christ. But in Unity, we recognize that the resurrection is about raising Christ consciousness in each of us, not once a year, but as continually throughout the year. A process of releasing, renewing, and rising up. So on his journey of transformation, what was Jesus asked to release? We can see this in some specific scenes before Jesus' arrest when he's praying in the Garden of Gethsemane. And if I had my PowerPoint, we would be seeing that right now. But imagine that. To use our imaginations today. And knowing what is about to happen, he advises his disciples who have followed him into the garden to pray. Well, he goes off to pray. And he's in anguish. He's sweating. He's praying hard. And we read in Luke that he says, "Father, if you are willing, take this cup from me. Yet not my will, but yours be done." Haven't we all been there in some situation where you say, "God, take this from me. I don't want to do this. I don't want to go through this. Why is this happening?" And, please, that prayer kind of pleading. But yet he says, "Yet not my will, but yours be done." So what did he have to release? It's very human fear. Fear, doubt, sorrow, disappointment, resistance to completing his mission, which he knew he was called to do. He knew what he was getting into when he went there. Surrendering all of this to God in prayer. Is that easy to do? Yeah, not often. So how do we know he released all of this? Well, we see this in the scene where he's facing arrest. He doesn't try to hide. He doesn't try to hide. When Judas shows up with the armed soldiers and the Jewish officials, he just goes right up. He says, "Who are you looking for?" I'll read a little bit. He says, "Jesus of Nazareth," they replied. He says, "I am he." And again, they said, who? He asks them, "Who is it that you want?" "Jesus of Nazareth." "I am he." So he's standing right there, not trying to hide, not trying to run. And this is a scene that always puzzled me as a child when, well, lots of the Bible puzzled me as a child, I will say. But this is where Simon Peter draws his sword and cuts off the ear of the servant of the high priest. And in Luke, Jesus heals that man's ear. He heals it right away. But we read here that Jesus commanded Peter, "Put your sword away. Shall I not drink the cup the Father has given me?" So he surrendered. We see he surrendered. They're not going to fight. They're not going to resist. And he lets himself be led away. So he had to release his human fear and willfulness to accept his role and to trust that even though on the outside it looked pretty grim, there was more to the story. And that's what we are asked to do. When it looks pretty grim, knowing there's more to the story, with new life behind what seems gone, destroyed, there's more on the way, more life. So I share this passage with you because it shows that it was not portraying Jesus as a victim. He was a powerful being with such clarity of thought, not humiliated by his arrest or crucifixion, but demonstrating mastery over the physical world. So we know that the Christ within us has that capacity also to rise above any fray of the outer world. Personally or collectively, those things that pop up, those betrayals, disappointments, confusion, destruction, things that are hard to bear. But we can pray. We can look for the light. And in times when it feels hard to do that, I think we each have times when it's hard to do that. So what do? We can look for what writer Alice Walker calls the human sunrise. She writes, "When it is all too much, when the news is so bad that meditation itself feels useless, and a single life feels too small a stone to offer on the altar of peace, find a human sunrise. Find those people who are committed to changing the scary reality." Human sunrises are happening all over the earth. At every moment, people gathering, people working to change the intolerable. People working to bring peace, light, compassion. That's why we're all here, isn't it? To shine and to learn how to do that more freely, more easily, with more trust and more joy. More joy. To let our divine light shine. So we saw what Jesus had to release. What do we need to release to rise up in consciousness? What are we asked to release? Maybe some of the same things: doubt, fear, resentments, and maybe letting go of other people's stones that are not ours to carry. Do you have some of those? I have a confession to make. Since I can remember, since I was a kid, but an adult too, every Easter season I have felt anxiety. And it doesn't make sense. I try to track it down logically, it didn't make sense. And then in meditation this week, as I sat with that, I just asked, Spirit, what is this? And what I got was, my mother did not like Easter. My mother did not like church. I call her the CEO of the church because Christmas and Easter only she came. But it was, I just could remember her just huffing and puffing and putting on her makeup and her, beehive hair and everything, and her squeezing herself into some kind of dress and heels. And she was not a dress and heels person. And there was such anxiety and anger she had at, feeling like she had to go to church. And my dad was the one who took us all to church usually. And so I had this awareness that maybe I picked some of that up. Maybe I've been carrying her sorrow around this. And maybe I can set that stone down now. I don't need to carry that anymore. So I'm happy to say that when I woke up this morning, I was feeling, yay, I can't wait to be here. So maybe there's something in your, if you're carrying any stones of sorrow from your family, or maybe even ancestral, to ask, do I need to keep carrying this? Can I set it down? Can I set someone else's weight down? So this power of release, we see it in nature, with the seeds, just like when it's time, they burst open. But there's a time when it looks like nothing's happening. But when the time is right, they burst open with new life, with a pattern of unfoldment. I didn't know this, but water bugs turn into dragonflies. Did you know that? Those big water bugs turn into dragonflies. Transformation. The chicks breaking out of the eggs. The shells. So transformation, a dramatic change in form or appearance, or it's going beyond form into a new expression of life. There was a cartoon that I saw of a church service, and it was up here was an egg. The preacher was an egg, and he had an egg congregation. And the caption to this was, "And Humpty Dumpty resurrected." On the PowerPoint behind him was a jar of Miracle Whip. We don't know what we're going to be like when transformation comes, right? Been miracle whipped. But we know it'll be good. It'll be good, something good. So the second Bible passage or scene I want to share with you from the book of Luke is, it's the day after Jesus' arrest, and it shows Jesus in his last moments on the cross. And I'll read Luke 23:44. It was now about the 6th hour, and there was darkness over the whole land until the 9th hour, while the sun's light failed, and the curtain of the temple was torn in two. Then Jesus, crying out with a loud voice, "Father, into thy hands I commit my spirit." So that's a final surrender, isn't it? Just letting go of it all. Here I am, God. So in this last moment of Jesus' crucifixion, the veil of the temple was torn in two. Now you have to picture, in the temple, there's this very thick cloth that separated the inner sanctum from the public area. So Jesus dying and tearing the temple made an opening between the sacred, the spiritual, and the physical, and symbolically made an opening for us to know the truth of our being, that it wasn't hidden anymore, that we could have direct access of God. We didn't need to go through any intermediaries. So symbolically, the veil of illusion is what happens when we find ourselves so engrossed in the physical, material world that we forget the spiritual. Temporary spiritual amnesia. And I love how Charles Fillmore describes this, and keep it true Lent. He writes, "The whole human race was caught in the meshes of its own thought, and through drowsy ignorance would have remained there, had not a break been made in the structure, and the light of a higher way let in. If you were held in the meshes of a great spider web, and someone made a hole through which you could pass, you would go where the hole was, and you would make your escape that way. Jesus made this aperture in human race thought, and thus threw open wide the door into the spiritual realm. So we see this breaking through the veil of illusion. So God's light can shine in and shine forth. And anytime we feel troubled too, that could be a good prayer to just see that curtain opening, to break through the veil of illusion that keeps us feeling separate or less than. So Jesus was the human sunrise, that sun rising to light up the world. Release, renew, rise up. So the renewal time, when does that happen? How do we know when that's happening? Something happens in secret often. And those times when we don't know what's next, when we're asked to have patience, when we prayed for something, and, well, waiting for an answer. But the times when we just let ourselves be. And in the story, the Easter story here with Jesus in the tomb, there's an aura of sadness around it because people were sad. The ones he loved were sad he was gone. But the tomb symbolically can represent our own time of rest and renewal, a time of reflection. Instead of the tomb as taking on many burdens, it could be a time of taking on many blessings, allowing ourselves to receive that secret activity, divine activity that's happening underground when it looks to the logical mind like nothing is happening. So we surrender to that divine activity. So Jesus in the tomb was the Sabbath, the day of rest. And don't we all need rest from our busy minds? From planning, from charting things out, from scrolling on our phones, from striving or doing. We all need time to just be, just to breathe and be, maybe get in nature with your portable nature and a little pet at home, the little love. And that's a time when we need the most patience too, right? Patience and trust that these ideas are forming, that new life is forming, that new life is rising up. And we trust that we will know without a doubt when it is time, the time is ripe for the next step. So rising up. The very first Easter tells us that life is eternal and love never dies. When Jesus resurrected, he appeared to those he loved, who didn't recognize him at first until they opened their minds to a new possibility. So there's an invitation for us there today to look for the Christ when we're out and about in the world, especially in places where we don't expect it. So beautiful to be here because we see it, we expect it, we celebrate in it in our spiritual community, which is so wonderful. And then to take that wonder, to take that spiritual vision out into the world, to look for it, to celebrate it, to smile at people, seeing their Christ behind any veil of illusion that even they might have. So lessons from Jesus' experience. No crucifixion, no resurrection. No mud, no lotus. Right? So knowing that each crucifixion experience we go to carries with it the promise of resurrection, coming back in a new way in our lives. And we've all experienced those crucifixions, haven't we? Those times that just feels like everything is ending. It was so difficult. Boy, those times when we've all asked to have that cup taken from us. And then when left with the cup, move through it. Move through it, and with the invitation to grow from the experience. We go through the experience, and we have a choice to grow through the experience too, don't we? We've all carried our crosses. Those times when we faced rejection, or embarrassment, or disappointment, divorce, bankruptcy, job loss, health challenges, or faced our own shadow. Those times that called us to die to an old way of being, to fall into the fertile ground, to rise up, transformed into a new self, a new divine expression. And these are often the times that we grow in ways that there is no other way possible to grow, going through these tough times. Have you noticed that? So know, too, that if you are carrying a cross right now, that if whatever life has brought to you, that God will bring you through it. There's a promise of resurrection in that crucifixion. And the example that Jesus set lets us know that we are not obliterated by these experiences. We are not destroyed. And the Christ within you is indestructible. So this Easter Sunday, may we rise up into a new story. The Easter story that says endings are not final. There is always more to the story. Endings are part of the endless cycle of beginnings and endings, of hope and despair, of life and death, of releasing and renewing, of sunsets and sunrises. So this week, I invite us to accept the invitation to bring hope, bring light, bring warmth into the world as the human sunrise. To go out and be a human sunrise. Jesus is Christ, and so are you. Thank you.